at the same few botanical gardens in London, England. And so I'm looking forward to hearing all the details. She had a blog that I know everybody mentioned, but I know I got a lot of people following her blog because it was just so descriptive. And, we, as American gardeners and horticulturists, could relate kind of what she was going to do with some of the new things that she was experiencing. But I'm later got her bachelor's in plant sciences with us, and then stayed and worked on her master's degree. There's Mark Wise and myself on her committee. And I look forward to hearing about your experiences here, and then we'll have to fill everybody in on what we're going to do next.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton, and thank you for coming. I'm attempting to also, while doing this presentation for you, record it to share with some folks at Q later on the internet. So I'm really appreciative of you coming. I hope that I'm able to pinpoint exactly what it is that you're hoping to hear. But just for anyone who's not familiar with Q, I'm going to begin with a brief history. The history of Q is one of my favorite parts, and so if I start to get a little long-winded, just look really bored, and I'll move on. Then I'll talk a bit about Q today and what their current mission is, and then I'll move into more of the details of my placement and some of the additional activities that I did. But I hope to leave a lot of time at the end for questions, and I have some photo albums pulled up for visuals for any particular questions you may have, or anything else like that. So to begin with, the Royal Botanic Gardens, and also, so this is going to look like this just because it's part of the video software. So, but the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew are located just southwest of London, on the southern side of the River Thames, or Thames as they may say. And it actually was two properties to begin with. Richmond Lodge further over to the left, and Kew Gardens there pictured on the right. It's about 300 acres, and it was formerly the home of royalty and aristocracy. Although gardens have been cultivated on the site as early as 1678, one could say that it was during the residence of Princess Augusta, the Princess of Wales, and her husband Frederick, that the seeds that would grow into the world-renowned botanic garden were sown. Under the guidance of Lord Bute, her friend and confidant, in 1759, she decided to create a physic garden that would contain all the plants known on Earth. Lofty goal. And then they hired Kew's first director, William Henry Asen. During that time, they also took on William Chambers, an architect who designed some of their famous buildings, including the Chinese pagoda that's drawn here. Not many survived until this point. Some were recreated in the 1800s by Decimus Burton, but the pagoda is still standing today. And a really interesting one of William Chambers' follies was Merlin's Cave, that was a structure that had these wax figures that were supposed to represent like King Arthur in his times, and they actually paid a hermit to live in the cave, and he would just sit there amongst the wax figures and startle people. Anyway, then King George III, Augusta's son, also lived on the site. It was a favorite residence of George III and his large family, where they stayed on Kew's royal palace and some of the nearby cottages on site. The palace is also where George III retreated to during his bouts of madness. And the group of us interns toured this area around the palace on the 4th of July this year. And I commented to the internship coordinator, I didn't feel especially patriotic touring George III's home on American Independence Day. And she said, oh, that thing. But then it was also during that time where George III was king that Sir Joseph Banks became involved with Kew. Um, he's this bust here amongst the plants at Chelsea Physic Garden. He's described by the author of The History of Kew, Ray Desmond, as the arbiter of Kew's destiny for almost half a century. And it was when he took responsibility of Kew as their informal director, he favored the gardens with his expertise, patronage, and insight. During that time, he continued to build Kew's collections and began a strong collection program, which either trained plant hunters on site at Kew in horticulture or sent Kew gardeners abroad to collect specimens of plants, which they would bring back to Kew in Wardian cases, like this one on the right, and they'd either bring back seeds or plant material, and then try to grow it at Kew in glass houses, and study it for its economic benefit and the best way to cultivate it, and then advise the government on where it should be sent elsewhere in the empire. But sending a plant halfway around the world to London to be grown and then sent back halfway around the world isn't particularly the best strategy. And so it was also during the time when Banks was an informal director that they started these colonial garden outposts, where they would send the plant material to an outpost, and then it would be studied there, and he would of course get the plants, and Banks would get the herbarium pressings. After the deaths of Banks and George III, Kew fell into a period of questionable management, and its future is bleak. There was even talk of removing the collections to other botanic gardens in the London area. That's when William Jackson Hooker, pictured here on the left, doggedly pursued the post as Kew's first official director. With his appointment began a period of growth and expansion. At the beginning of his directorship, the property was transferred from the royal estate to the Department of Woods and Forests, and Kew eventually absorbed the property at Richmond Lodge. So Kew went from being more of a private royal garden to actually a public garden, in theory, but not so much in practice. William Hooker worked hard to bring Kew back to the forefront of the horticultural world and paved the way for his son, Sir Joseph Dalton Hooker, there in the middle, to succeed him as director. Joseph Hooker was followed as director of Kew by his son-in-law, Sir William Thistleton Dyer, here on the right. And no, he's not in the army. This is Kew's I struggle with this word, constabulary. Kew has its own police department, which Thistleton Dyer started, and he wore the uniform of. So it was during this era in Kew's history, that was also known as the Hooker dynasty, that the herbaceous and woody collections were ordered and reordered systematically, taxonomically. Multiple state-of-the-art conservatories were erected, like the Palm House here on the left. Kew's endeavors in economic botany were strengthened. Museums were built that were dedicated to botanical art, and a herbarium that was independent of the British Museum was created. Also, a laboratory for the study of plant physiology was established. However, the debate as to whether Kew should be a public park with ornate displays and greater access to the public, or a scientific establishment dedicated to botanical pursuits and the study of horticulture, went on throughout the 19th century. Garden leaderships and members of the scientific community believed that Kew should be a place of research and education, whereas the government and the public wanted in. So in one instance, the neighboring community of Richmond wanted Kew to remove a brick boundary wall that protects the plants on their site so that they could come in and use the space whenever they wanted to. And of course, the then director, Joseph Hooker, resisted, and then he added 3 feet in height to the wall. You can imagine how they reacted, and when they demanded an explanation, he said, "Oh, no, this wasn't about that. I raised the height of the wall because I suspect my gardeners have been climbing the walls and going to the pub during work hours. So it's not to keep you out, it's to keep my staff in." Uh, so, during the past 100 years, the directorship has become more of a comparatively short-term endeavor rather than a lifelong career. Although the question of funding continues to be an ongoing challenge, the Gardens have adapted to shifting leadership to accomplish a great deal. Right now, or as of 2007, there are over 30,000 plant taxa in their living collections. There's more than 8 million pressings of both plants and fungi in their herbarium. Kew has 42 historic structures, grades 1 and 2, including a palace, an orangery, and 3 conservatories. They annexed the 500-acre Wakehurst Place in Sussex, not so much for the additional acreage, but so that they can grow things that aren't adapted to a London climate. Nearly 2 million seeds are stored in their Millennium Seed Bank at Wakehurst, and they've been classified as a World Heritage Site. So with the diversity of activities, facilities, and collections, it seems like it would make streamlining operations and identifying a mission difficult for modern Kew. However, the leadership identified that the Royal Botanic Gardens' world-class facilities, continued dedication to botanic exploration, and strong connection to a global network of botanic gardens made it well equipped to shift its focus to conservation, which informed its current mission to inspire and deliver science-based conservation worldwide, enhancing the quality of life. So a couple ways that they fulfill that commitment is with the Millennium Seed Bank, pictured here on the left at Wakehurst Place, which contains more than 95% of the United Kingdom's native flora and more than 10% of the world's flora, estimated. In addition to storing seeds for the future, the MSB works with countries and special interest groups around the world to reintroduce endangered and extinct plant species back to their natural habitat. Kew's micropropagation facility works in tandem with the MSB, experimenting with different methods of coaxing difficult seeds like the UK's native lady slipper orchid to germinate. So if anyone's familiar, the lady slipper orchid was collected to the brink of extinction, and even though they had seeds, they had difficulty sprouting them, and so they had difficulty reintroducing this plant back to its native habitat. Thanks to both the seeds stored at the Millennium Seed Bank and the people at the micropropagation facility, they worked out just a unique combination of environmental requirements for those seeds, and it's been reintroduced in its native habitat. These massive living collections are used to support their mission of conservation. Some plants that have been growing at Kew for years are endangered in their natural environment or even extinct. So Kew horticulturalists who are familiar with cultivating these plants lend support, seeds, and plant material to countries that hope to reintroduce these species back to their native habitat. Kew's labeling system is an important part of this in that it's used to track its living collections. So we had a group from the University of Tennessee come visit us a month into my internship, and I asked the public horticulture students to let me know what they thought of the signage at Kew. And one student said of the plant labels, those aren't for visitors. And she's kind of right. They don't have a common name, but they do have the scientific name, the plant family in the right-hand corner, the region that it's native to, and then up in the left-hand corner is the accession number. And the accession number is a unique code that's used to track that specific plant or group of plants at Kew. So the accession number is a combination of the year that it was collected and the number of plant that it was collected that year. So this particular plant was the 615th plant that was collected in 1983, and the letters underneath correspond to either the donor or collector that left it for Kew. Any of the information on the label can be used to look up the plant in Kew's Living Collections database. And in the database is information on how to cultivate, where it came from, its origin, etc. But anyone who's familiar with a botanic garden or who's worked in a botanic garden knows that labels disappear, break, and move between collections. That's why Kew regularly verifies their plants. The verification process is a partnership between horticulturalists, the herbarium, the seed bank, and sometimes the Jodrell laboratories. Sections of the specimen, including the root, stem, leaves, flowers, seeds, are collected and placed in a plastic bag with a complete printout from the database. It's sent to the herbarium where they look up the records and verify that the plant that is next to the label is indeed what it's supposed to be. At that time, the botanist will also provide any updated taxonomic information. If the family name has changed, they'll give new family information and they'll print out a new label for them. And if it's not the right plant, then the Millennium Seed Bank will provide the correct seed and the propagation facility will plant some new ones and they'll get that corrected. And again, that's the exception number. Education is another way that Kew fulfills its mission of conservation. They have interpretive signage on their displays. They have activities for young families and visitors, and a great school visits program. I was able, on my very last afternoon of the internship, to tag along on their first school visit of the semester, where we had a group of six-year-olds from Devonshire come to the conservatories and pretend that they were in the tropical rainforest. What a great way to introduce these students to the plants that play such a big part in all of our lives every day, but we may never see. And maybe not see them in their native habitat, but to see them in a way that they would never see. And one student asked, is everything in here real? Are these real plants? And the teacher said, yes, they're real plants. Everything in here is real. Forgetting that the night before was the student's prank night. So we rounded the corner and some of the palm houses, massive banana trees that did have a flower and some real bananas on it, had these huge fake plastic bananas and plastic monkeys hanging down. And you can imagine those 6-year-olds' reaction to that. Kew also has, through the School of Horticulture, a horticulture diploma program, which is a 3-year course where a third of the year is spent in traditional classroom activities and the rest of the year is in practical work placement in different areas of the garden. They have a 2-year apprenticeship program that also has different placements around the garden and some classroom activities, and a 3-month internship that I was a part of. So I was fortunate as an intern to be at Kew at a really interesting time in its history. As an intern, my progress was overseen by the School of Horticulture, and the team that I was placed in was with the Hardy Display section. Although at the top of a normal organizational chart, you would have the director of Kew, Richard Deverell. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to start with the director of horticulture, which was formerly known as the curator post. Both Hardy Display and the School of Horticulture fall under his purview. The current director of horticulture is Richard Barley. Before coming to Kew about 1 year ago, Barley worked with the Royal Botanic Gardens, Melbourne, for 30 years, where 11 of those years were spent in leadership roles. There's several layers of management between the director and my team. So they were actually in the process of shifting during my placement. They're going through a restructure program. So the dotted line signifies where I kind of skipped some stops because that was in the process of changing while I was there. So I've highlighted the acting head of the Hardy Display section, Richard Rolfred. He's been the acting head for 2.5 years, and he's held various leadership roles at Kew over the past 25 years. My team leader was Shelley Cleave. She's been the team leader in charge of the order beds, grass garden, salvia border, rose pergola, and aquatics garden for about 4 years, and she's been on Kew's horticulture staff for 11 years. Then below Shelley are 2 Band B horticulturalists, and that just corresponds to, they have a lettering system that says how high up you are in the organizational chart. On the other side of the tree is the School of Horticulture. The acting principal is Martin Staniford, who's been serving in that role since early 2012, although he's he came to Kew in 1981 as a horticulture diploma student. Like Richard Wilfred, he's held a variety of management roles in his 33 years at Kew. And the internship wouldn't have been possible without Kate Dixon, the internship coordinator. She assumed that role 1 year ago after she graduated from Kew's diploma program, and she's been with Kew for 4 years. Through the School of Horticulture, in my placement, were 2 diploma students and 1 apprentice. And both the diploma and the apprenticeship program are good in that they want to give those students experience with management and leadership, which is great, but which is a really wonderful thing. So they were managing me and the other intern. So we're just right down there at the bottom. Getting onto my placement, the main area that I was working in were the order beds, where the plants are ordered taxonomically by plant family. And so this is just a small section that continues on to the left, and overlooking the order beds is the beautiful recreation of William Chambers' Temple of Aeolus. And the plant family beds are ordered by their families. So these are the Lamiaceae beds. What was the main thing we did in the order beds? I would have to say that was edging, and that's something I had never done before. I didn't know what it was, and I had never seen these tools before. But edging is a common practice in the UK, where you use these long shears to snip the grass that is growing ever so slightly into your garden bed. We did that every Monday. Everyone on staff and 2 volunteers would spend between 3 hours and the whole day, depending on how many of us there were and how much we needed to edging the order bed. And I actually walked it off and did some calculations. On an average Monday, we would edge about 2 miles. Yep. But we got strong arms. But actually, a good, a really common comment we got, and everyone always thought it was an original thing from Canadian and U.S. visitors. They would come up and stop. What are you doing? You know, there's a machine that does that. Yeah. In the middle of the order beds is the rose pergola, where we would tie back the roses just to keep them from hanging down and scratching visitors and scratching staff members that were mowing. Right now, they're working on their hard prune and training of the rose pergola. The grass garden is one of the most beautiful places at all of Kew, and it's really lovely right now. But we spent a fair bit of time, usually about 1 day a week, depending on the week, weeding the grass garden. The grass garden is has a very thin layer of mulch because of the grass's specific needs. They didn't want to over mulch them and give them too many nutrients and that sort of thing. So although it's really beautiful, as you can see on the right, Simon, our apprentice, is standing in the middle of the bed, and those are really big grass beds, and they're very sharp. So if you're there on a windy day, you need to make sure that you're wearing long sleeves and long pants, or else you'll end up being scratched. Although we did have some broadleaf weeds, the main weed problems in the grass garden were grasses. We had couch grass, or as they say, couch grass, and which were somewhat of a problem. But if you go back to this picture, all these really beautiful seed heads right now are dropping their seed on the ground, and they sprout up. So it's really important to pull up all of the grass seedlings lest they outcompete the specimens that are supposed to be there that may have some kind of importance, not just for the visitors and aesthetically, but also for their collections and what they're trying to do with conservation. So it's really important for staff members to weed the garden so that when they do their verification later on, it's actually the right plant that's by the label. We worked in the secluded garden, which is a nice quiet little pocket of Kew that has really lovely plants that are grown for the senses, for fragrance and soft colors and sound, and there's a really nice tinkling fountain. Not a lot of visitors find it because it's very tucked around the back. The aquatic gardens, which was put in earlier in the 19th century, all of this is concrete, and so when it was new, it shone really nice and white. And the staff called it White City because it was so blindingly bright. But there are some problems working with a very old aquatic garden, including old plumbing, or they don't have fittings for it anymore. If something breaks, you can't just order a new piece. If you can find the right piece, you probably have to order a whole new set. And there's lots of obsolete plumbing hanging down at the bottom. You have to be careful not to trip over. Most of what we did was scooping out aquatic weeds like duckweed, verlemna, blanket weed, and other algae. And the salvia border, which is this really lovely strip of plants growing along the wall between the order beds and the rock garden. And the salvia closest to us are the New World salvia, and those closer to the visitors in the back are the Old World salvia from Europe and that continent. And normally, you would, if they were really stretched for time, they would just come through in July and pack back those salvia so that they would get a second flush right now. But since they had 2 interns, we got to spend a lot of time deadheading the salvia, as our Bansi India would say, the little fiddly bits. And we would spend hours and hours sitting on news heads, getting every single little dead head so that it looked beautiful the whole summer. We didn't have to hack at anything. And then the last week we were fortunate, India set up a opportunity for us to do some propagation. Kew is so big that the individual horticulturists don't usually get the chance to propagate their own plant material. That's done by their propagation department. So you can't just go out to the store and buy a plant and stick it in because of labeling and accessions. And also they want to do everything in an exact procedure. So we did some salvia cutting, and it's important to have everything labeled from the beginning, because if those cuttings get mixed up, then it messes up the labeling, which messes with the collections, and you have to verify it later on. And it's really interesting. They have a very specific procedure and process, and I'm glad we had the chance to do that. So this is a map of Kew today. This is what you would get at the visitor's entrance, and everything that I just described is right in that little corner. So out of the 300 acres at Kew, I was just right there in those yellow boxes. I was embarrassed to admit, when the Glorious Gardens of Europe tour came, after I'd been placed there for 1 month, I still had not seen the entire garden. So I was glad to be able to spend the day with them exploring. Going back to the organizational structure, I had the opportunity to interview some folks in the leadership positions above me. I adapted some questions from Andy Pulte's senior survey, or thesis survey, of botanic garden directors in the U.S. and changed them for my needs. And what I did was I would ask them a question, they would answer it, I would write down their answer, and then later on I sifted through everything they said and looked for common themes. So in one question I asked, for each different position I asked, what should universities emphasize in their coursework to train future professionals for leadership positions such as theirs? And the main thing that they said, for leadership positions like each of theirs, universities need to emphasize the importance of work experience. To quote the principal, these applicants need some seasons in the industry before applying for a job like his. They can't expect to just graduate with their bachelor's and step into these roles. They need practical work experience. Horticulture knowledge was important, and then each of these kind of changes based on their role. So of course the director needs you need some training in public interaction and communication, whereas with a team leader you need more management and planning. I asked each of them for an experience that influenced their decision to be in the field of public horticulture, and it was interesting that the people who are higher up on that chart, when I asked them that question, pinpointed a youth experience. There's the people who are lower on the chart, didn't mention a youth experience, and actually both of them said that they fell into it, or they were a career changer and they came to horticulture later in life. So everybody did have experiences in youth with plants, but when you ask them about an experience that brought them to the field, those people who've been in the industry longest said it was something that happened in their childhood. And then I asked for the most memorable garden or plant-based experience from their childhood, and all of them said that their experience was at or around their family home. The people higher up on the chart mentioned hands-on horticulture activities, and then the internship coordinator and team leader mentioned things that still counted as plant-based but may not necessarily be an active gardening activity. While I was in England, of course, I had to take advantage of being so close to these other fantastic gardens. I was kind of picked on a little bit with my crew and my new friends for taking these whirlwind garden excursions where I would sleep on a train or in a train station and be at a city first thing in the morning. I would get breakfast, go to a garden, and maybe do something else, and then get the train back. And probably my favorite place that I went to was the Eden Project in Cornwall. It's this really fantastic project where they have these huge biomes, and actually I've been wanting to go there for a long time. When I was a freshman in horticulture, my very first semester in Intro to Public Horticulture, this was my garden research paper for Dr. Hamilton. So, of course I had to go. It was fantastic. I also went to the Jardin des Plantes, if I said that correctly, in Paris, which had these fantastic signs. I couldn't read any of them. I really wish that I could read French or they had something else. That Eden Project at the bottom of the interpretive signage, they had hieroglyphics for people who aren't native English speakers. And I thought that was a great idea. I also saw the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh, the National Botanic Gardens in Dublin, that had this really fantastic conservatory that kind of, it wasn't, it had these rooms that just kind of crossed against each other. Not to mention all these other ones, some fantastic hosta collections of private collectors from the British Hosta and Hammerkella Society, some gardens around London. I got to tag along with the Glorious Gardens tours in my area, including Great Dixter and Sissinghurst, and of course Keys Racehorse Place. So I'd like to thank the Botanical Research Institute of Texas for funding this internship. Without their financial support, I wouldn't have been able to go. I'd like to thank Andy Pulke for sending the email about this internship in the first place, or I wouldn't have known about it and applied and gone. And Dr. Hamilton for her support and encouragement for me to research the history of the gardens, because I understood where I was so much better having read a bit about it beforehand. I'd like to thank you and the staff there. I'd like to thank the people who did the interview with me, the people on my team, Kate Dixon and everyone in the School of Horticulture, and the Glorious Gardens Mini-Term Group for giving me a nice break and a breath of Tennessee air in the middle of my internship. So with that, I'd like to open it up. Are there any questions? Yes.
So you say when you were educated,
Yeah.
what was you on leaf blowers?
Oh, they do use leaf blowers, but they try to do it earlier in the morning so it's not disturbing to visitors. Although sometimes you just can't help it. But they do use leaf blowers, yeah. But mostly we just scooped up the little pieces of grass clippings. Anyone else? Yeah? I do.
Maybe tell everybody where you was it hard to leave or where you're looking for that coming from?
Well, there are something, I mean, I miss my new friends and I miss being at Kew with that really fantastic garden, but I also I'm glad to be home and to be with people who sound like me. Yeah. When I talk, or when you talk, I understand exactly what you're saying most of the time, whereas with them, I had to go a lot on tone of voice. I didn't understand all of the phrases, definitely didn't understand the accent. So it was a bit, it's a lot better to be with people who sound like me. Are there any other questions?
Did you enjoy the Chelsea visit?
I did. That was the first garden other than Kew that I visited, and I just, even though it was a small garden compared to Kew, I liked their signage, and I really liked how they had their collections arranged. Things were kind of growing into the pathways, but that's just because they have different maintenance abilities, and um, it was, they have this wonderful free tour where you can just jump on board and someone will guide you around the garden, and they just redid their medicinal plant garden with some new plants and new signage, and that was really interesting. Yeah. Yes.
Are there any tips that you would give other students who might go to finish or internship out of the country? Any piece of advice that they could give the country on the way?
I would say that it would be a good idea to research the internship or the visa process for that country well in advance, because depending on where you're going, it can be very difficult to get your visa done. And I applied at just the exact wrong moment with the UK border agency. They were redoing their application process, and things were lost. And then maybe considering if the country you're going to has priority status visa application, to consider doing that and paying a little bit more. But also look for any scholarship opportunities and talk to people who've been there.
How did you figure out about that?
You emailed me. Oh, yes, that's the point of that. If you're a student and you want to know about these fantastic funding opportunities and internship opportunities, I would absolutely read my email. Yeah.
Amanda, how did you do in the internship from your perspective? Did they really try to teach you and educate you? Was it really a meaningful thing? Or, I mean, sometimes your students say, well, I just slave labor.
So I was really fortunate to be on a team that where we had a really diverse areas of property. We weren't just in one small section doing the same thing every day. We had a pretty big group, and our team leader was aware of the reason that we were there was to learn. And she asked us the first day what we were hoping to learn. And yes, we did weeding and watering and some really mundane activities, but she would try to break it up with these special, it was still work, but kind of special topics once a week, like the propagation, or if we were working in the grass garden every day, then she would let us go tie in roses for a little bit in the middle and take a break. Yeah. So these pictures are from, are of the Victoria Amazonica giant water lily. Are there any other questions? Anything? All right. Thank you.
Hey, Amanda.
Yes.
Is there anybody that wants